Imagine knowing exactly what your students are learning and exactly which steps you need to take next.
Join us in Down with the Reading Quiz to craft meaningful and productive formative assessments that move away from gotcha moments of basic recall and toward assessing what your students actually can do.
In this 30-minute free masterclass, we'll share 3 powerful assessment keys that work for any novel at any time of the year.
Head to shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to sign up, and we'll also send you a free workbook to keep track of all your notes.
Once again, that's shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to nail formative assessments forever.
Hey, Amanda.
Hey, Marie.
What are you up to later? Want to join me for happy hour?
I'm all in.
And guess what's amazing? Our listeners and friends of the podcast can also join us because Brave New Teaching Happy Hour has officially launched. Cheers!
Cheers, everyone. We are officially hanging out a little bit longer after school with an extended, extra private podcast feed just for you.
Yes. Members of Happy Hour get extra 15 minutes of the podcast, give or take, because you know us, we run a little bit long. It's just kind of how we are. But if you would like to get in on this Happy Hour action, please join us. It is only $5 a month. Head to curriculumrehab.com/happy hour and get yourself signed up, because when you're there, Amanda, tell our friends what we do every month for our Happy Hour members.
I think my favorite part is coming up with a new free resource for our listeners every month. And then we pretty much break down that resource and how to use it. We also like to have guests on to do extended episodes and even Q&A that's just for you about that resource. It's really exclusive and super private just for you.
So if you are like us and you like hanging out, you like chit-chatting about all things that are teaching, teacher life, and everything under that umbrella, join us for happy hour and we will see you there. Bye.
Bye.
Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching, and welcome to another interview in our Building Classroom Community Behavior Management. It's kind of a lot of different things, this series. I think we're calling it Classroom Management, but I think if you have listened to the first couple of episodes in this series, you are catching on that to us here in the Brave New Teaching community and to our friends of the podcast who are coming on, much like our friend of the podcast, Dr. Smith, who's coming on today, classroom management, behavior management is synonymous with community. And if it's not, that means that it's probably not working. And that means that we have some things that we can help with, such as today's interview. Today we are talking to Dr. Deonna Smith, who is just like one of those educators that when you sit down and you hear or you talk to this person, you go, oh, wow. Your heart and soul are in this profession, in this vocation. And man, you can really cut through the you-know-what and just see what is best for kids. I've been a fan of Dr. Smith for a while, but like being able to talk to her and pick her brain a little bit and hear just what makes her tick as an educator and as a person, because there's not a whole lot. Just like with me, like with Amanda, there's not a whole lot of differentiation between what makes us tick as a person and what makes us tick as educators, right? Because we're following our calling to do this thing called educating kids. And that shines through in everything that she says. We talk about all sorts of things. We talk about social justice. We talk about building communities in our classrooms. We talk about professional development done right. We talk about what to do as a veteran teacher. We talk about what to do as an administrator. What steps you can take as a brand spanking new teacher who wants to, quote unquote, do things right? And wants to build community organically and authentically and show your students that they all matter and that you see them. She gives some amazing tips on that we could all follow. You don't have to be brand new to follow that. I want to read you a little bit of her bio because it just you are in for a treat today, friends. So we are talking today to Dr. Deonna Smith. Deonna is a former teacher, instructional coach, and school leader. Before transitioning into leadership, Deonna taught intervention, elementary and middle school math and science. As a student and teacher, Deonna saw how systemic racism negatively impacted both adults and kids. This experience set Deonna on a journey to learn more about how teachers can liberate their students' potential through anti-racist practices. Deonna is dedicated to her own learning as well and recently completed her doctorate in education from Loyola Marymount University. We got to give her a little like, yay, rah, rah, you're a doctor. That's so cool. You're so much cooler than us situation. It was very fun when we started recording. You know what? I need to stop so that you all can just hear the genius that is Dr. Deonna Smith. And we cannot wait to hear all of the gems that you are taking away from today's episode. Make sure that you head to our show notes at bravenewteaching.com and download our workbook for this series of episodes. It will be there for you to help you kind of keep track of your notes. And it just groups all the episodes that talk about what we're talking about today, which is building authentic and organic community in a class so that you can really see a student. And all of these practices can benefit everybody. So without any further ado, enjoy today's interview with Dr. Deonna Smith. And first, cue the music.
You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a teacher from Southern California.
Join us at bravenewteaching.com to find out more about our courses, festivals, and get every episode's show notes.
We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show. All right, Brave New Teaching community, I would like to give a big, huge welcome to the podcast to Deonna Smith, who is joining us today to talk about all sorts of things classroom management and to share her zone of genius and expertise. And we could not be happier to be chatting today. Welcome to the podcast, Deonna.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to jump into this conversation with y'all today.
So Amanda was actually the first one that was like, when we started talking about having a series on classroom management, we were like, but really, like, what does that look like? And by now, listeners, you've heard a couple of different episodes. If you haven't, pause us, jump back, or just keep listening. You can kind of listen in any order that you would like to. But we were talking about, like, really, classroom management can get really gimmicky and really, like, strategy based, where it's kind of like flash in the pan strategy. But really, when we start talking about what we mean by classroom management, it's more community and it's more deeply entrenched in an instructional practice and just a teaching practice in general and the way that you interact with everybody on campus. And she goes, I know exactly who we need to talk to. And then she fangirled for a solid like hour and was like, oh, and she said this on her Instagram, and Deonna said this. And so then when we got in contact with you, Amanda was very excited. So we were like, yeah, I mean, I am too. I just wanted you to know, Deonna, that she fangirled the heck out of you.
Thank you so much.
Deonna, we kind of shared a little bit about your story in the intro, but could you go ahead and give your own introduction to yourself, your work, what you've been doing, and then we'll kind of dig in more to classroom management and some misconceptions around how all that goes down in the classroom.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Deonna, officially Dr. Smith now too, but you can say
Congratulations. That is so exciting.
Yeah. And I'm from Spokane, Washington, small town where Rachel Dolezal was. So if that gives you a little context for what the city is like. And I was the only person of color in an all-white school for most of my life. I went to PWIs three times for my undergrad, master's, and doctorate. So I've just been very deeply impacted on a personal level by, white supremacy culture and education and racism and systemic racism. And so it was really my personal experience that propelled me to want to get into education. I just wanted to always be the teacher that I never had. I never had a Black teacher. Still to this day, I've never had a Black woman as my teacher. So I really wanted to be that person for my students. And I really started off like a lot of us did with my access point was culturally relevant or culturally responsive teaching. And then it kind of crescendoed, right? And we all crescendoed along with it, with kind of the apex happening in 2020, with just when the world cracked wide open and we were all just more deeply aware of how deep systemic oppression really is and those roots. And so it kind of culminated in me getting invested in anti-racist teaching. And along that way, I taught intervention. I taught fifth grade. I taught middle school math and science. And I just had just a genuine love for teaching. And so because of that love, I, kind of moved up the ladder. I think a lot of teachers, we move up thinking that we're going to enjoy it, but I really didn't. I would much prefer to be in a classroom, to be honest with you. But I did, I kind of fell into that classic trap of kind of instructional coach. And then I was a DEI director, and then I went to admin. But really along the way, I started talking to teachers across the country and using social media as a place of community building and people who are like-minded and wanted to do this work and were excited about it. So that's how kind of Deonna Smith Consulting and my Instagram came to be. And when I'm not doing that, which it's like no days off for me because this is just who I am as a person. But when I'm not actively
you're in good company. Yeah, we're the same. Yeah.
When I'm not actively advocating, I'm a big Beyonce fan. So love Beyonce, love baking, hiking, and exploring. And I've lived in California for 10 years now. So just, California vibes, you kind of become a beach girl, that kind of thing. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, that's a vibe I don't yet understand. But
She
Marie
doesn't.
keeps telling me to get on board with it because it's a real thing. And I'm
Yes.
landlocked Illinoisan over here for life. And I'm like, it's not real to have a beach life. This isn't real.
Well, and then she's like, you've really got to get out of California. There's earthquakes there. And I'm looking at her like, that's what you're latching onto? It's the earthquakes
and wildfires. It's a very dangerous place to live. Yes.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous place to live. This is what she tells me all the time. And I'm like, oh,
I'm so
okay.
Well, Deonna, can I have Deonna just do one thing really quick?
Yeah, yes, please.
We're going to talk in this episode a lot about ABAR. Can you define that for our audience? Because I don't think we're going to use the full term every time, so that they're kind of ready to flex with us with some of that terminology.
Yeah. So I think ABAR is it encompasses anti-racism and anti-bias, right? And those things are not it's kind of a Venn diagram. So anti-bias means examining the biases that we're all programmed into having. Everyone has biases. And then anti-racist kind of takes it a little bit step further, which is actively dismantling systemic racism in the United States and specifically in this context of education. So I think the two are related, but not exactly the same. But when we say ABAR, it kind of broadly encompasses everything to that work. I think it is a similar term to DEI, if you're familiar with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's kind of in that same field. And to be honest with you, it kind of gets to be alphabet soup on a lot of things. People obsess over the right terms.
Right.
But for me, it's the work is really under the broader banner of educational justice. And these are kind of prongs that go underneath it, if that makes sense.
So for listeners, we are going to have all of this stuff in the show notes. Don't forget, if you ever want clarification and if we get kind of carried away and you're like, what's going on here? Don't forget to head to our show notes. We will have all of Deonna's information, contact information, and a little glossary of some of the things that we go over and all the best hits from our interview. So don't forget that that's there for you.
Yeah. Oh, and I think it's really important too, to have somebody who really knows what you're talking about to be able to define and to talk about some of these terms that, like you said, do become alphabet soup, especially if we're talking to educators, and a lot of our audience is educators who are on teacher social media and are either extremely involved or seeking out more information. It's easy to get confused. It's easy to have misinformation. It's easy for things to get all jumbled together. And so thank you for taking a minute to define all of that. It's a good idea to hear good info.
And it's so it's important. And then sometimes it's not important because you don't want to get too caught up in it. But then at the end, it is kind of important because diversity is not the same as anti-racism. So this is something that Amanda, you probably heard me go on this a million times on my Instagram because I'm so passionate about it. But when we say diversity is a mixture of different, expressions of what it means to be a human being. That is not the same as undoing systemic racism in education. So I think it's important, but I don't want people to get too caught up in it. But it is good to push yourself, right? To hold yourself accountable to doing all of those things and not just starting with diversity and ending there.
Right. Well, and in all of education, including what we're talking about today, there's a lot of unlearning that has to happen in order for further learning to progress. And so it's good to go back to like, let's define what we're really talking about. Let's redefine what we're talking about. Let's talk about the application of what we're talking about. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. And actually, I know that we were going to talk about this a little bit later, but I feel like this is a good moment. In your consulting, what sorts of work do you do with schools? And then we're going to jump into, I think, some nitty gritty of your ideas in classroom management. What does your consulting service look like on a general day? Like, what do you do with a school?
Yeah, I love that. So I have a couple of different ways that schools can work with me. The most comprehensive is like a partnership, or what I would call like a VIP day. So when I'm in partnership with schools, we are doing the deep systemic work, where that's like, I'm looking at your bell schedule, I'm looking at your budget, I'm meeting with school leaders, I'm doing virtual or in-person observations. We're talking about like curriculums and structures. And that's like the high end of what I do, but it's the most impactful, because so often we get caught up in this, like, can you give me a teacher workshop? And I definitely do teacher workshops too, but teaching teachers about anti-racist behavior management is not the same as meeting with the school leader and being like, here's where anti-Blackness is showing up in your policies. And here's where, your school is not a place where your students with learning difference can thrive. And really, like, A, there's some overlap there. And B, how can we like dismantle and unpack that? So that's kind of like the higher level, where it's really looking to say, like, this is about to become a school that is joyful, that is just, where we're liberating students' potential. So that's kind of like the deeper work. Other principals want to work with me, and they just want like somebody to talk to, almost like a consultant, because as a former school leader, you make so many decisions during the day. And that's where I see the most inequity, right? It's those snap decisions. It's how are we going to handle this? Who's getting expelled? Who's getting hired? Who's getting fired? All of those little questions. So sometimes people just want to, like, an eye on somebody who like has a critical understanding of these things, to say like, this isn't the best practice, or like, let's unpack why you think that this student should be suspended, but this student was expelled. So it's those kind of questions.
And so the administration is saying, tell me what I'm not seeing here. And you're like, okay. Yeah. And you're able to be, I mean, by many means impartial, in that you don't specifically know those kids, but you can look at it from a bird's eye to say, that's, I know that those sorts of relationships happen a lot in corporate leadership. I only know that because I have a cousin who works in corporate and tells me about all these things. And I go, I wonder if that happens in education. And now you're telling me it does. And that,
We definitely need to do it more, but it does happen. And like, so really, my ideal, like the top tier package, is I'm working with leaders, systems, teachers, students, and then the families too. I have a family workshop that I do, because a lot of folks are so focused on like, how can we bring families in, but they're not looking at it from the family's perspective. And so I work with families to kind of grease those wheels between schools. And then like the mid tier is, maybe 3 teacher training sessions, or a beginning of the year PD is another one that I love to do. And I'm working a lot heavily with teachers, and then maybe a couple meetings with administrators. And then the lowest tier, which is still impactful, but I usually try to help people scale, is I'm coming in doing a teacher workshop or observing. I love to observe and give feedback, because see, people come in to observe classrooms, and a lot of times their protocol, like what they're looking for, has nothing to do with anti-racism or even cultural responsiveness. Their metrics are totally different. So I have my own metrics that I like teach people about, like, hey, this is what it looks like to run a classroom in a way that liberates Black and Brown students' potential, and brings also, your students that are not of color into that. And so I use that kind of rubric and work with people on that. So it really depends, but it's very customizable, because every school is so different. Like,
I was going to say, as it has to be, right? Yeah.
I work with like schools where families are paying like $40,000 a year. And then I work with schools where, the kids are system involved, and, a lot of the kids are like, we have a lot of houselessness, especially if I work with a school here in LA. So it is truly like the gambit of everything that you could imagine: public, charter, private, Catholic, everything.
Oh my gosh, that is incredible. And I totally can empathize with that idea of a workshop being helpful, but not all the work. I mean, it's how many times have I seen, a one-stop shop workshop, but then the admin doesn't carry that work forward, or they kind of use you as a look what I did and check off the box. And I know you from watching you, and we've gotten to know each other a little bit, but I think that's got to be like hard for you too, is that you don't want to be used in a way that's like counterintuitive to what you're trying to do.
Right. And that's what I always say. Like, I don't work with every single school that comes my way, because some schools are really trying to, again, check off a box. They want to say like this happened. But for me, I really push to work with the school leaders, because I've been a teacher. So I've been on the receiving end of having somebody come in and be like, here's all these things that you need to do. And then, it's just not sustainable, because either the leadership isn't equally yoked and equally invested, or a lot of the stuff that I talk about. An anti-racist classroom is one thing, but it's going to work best in an anti-racist school. So if the school is not willing to like give a little, or, when I talk about certain systems or practices and then your admin doesn't back you up, I'm not personally there, so I can only help you so much. So I need the principals and stuff to like also be in that work too.
And it's an overhaul. It's a big overhaul shift, and like something that we've talked about many times on the podcast is that we have seen. So I'm going into my 16th year of teaching. Amanda has been in the classroom. She's out of the classroom now, but was in the classroom for just about as long as me. Like, we've been around the block a few times to also have that like healthy dose of skepticism of like, okay, but when is the pendulum swinging the other way? And you're like, yeah, but this isn't like,
this isn't that.
Right. And anti-bias and anti-racist and DEI and like just teaching humans in a way that is being better humans and creating systems where, like you said, all of our kids get to shine and unlock that potential is not a pendulum swing. It's doing better. You know better and you do better and finding out even more.
Brave new teaching listeners, I have to just quickly stop in and check on you. How are you doing? Are you ready for back to school? I want you to remember that there's so much more about back to school than getting your shopping list taken care of. If you're scrambling in your head and losing sleep about organizing your first 10 days, your first 2 weeks, your first couple of days, I want you to know that I've been working so hard all summer to bring you a course that will bring you peace, purpose, and a sense of direction for your entire semester. My brand new course, The First 10 Days, is ready for you, and I am so anxious to get it into your hands. I want to share, first of all, a quick testimonial from a teacher friend of mine who's already gone through it and what she's experiencing. Take a listen.
Hey Amanda, I wanted to let you know that I purchased your first 10 days and I am only on day 2. I just got done watching day 2 video and I absolutely love the content. Like, this is so good. I am so excited to go back to school. I'm taking all sorts of notes. I am rewatching the videos. I'm really just like taking my time going through each video and the resources that you are providing. I needed this. I told you I'm preparing for year number 16 of teaching, and this is so good.
Whether you're preparing for year 16 or year 1, I'm here to walk alongside you if you're feeling a little bit lost. Re-entering the classroom this year is going to be tough, but going in with clarity, purpose, and a real sense of where everything is headed, you will feel confident, and that confidence will transcend into everything you do in building the classroom community that you and your students deserve. I hope I can help you. Stop by the show notes today to check out and see more of how the first 10 days can support you getting ready for back to school. Back to the show.
So I feel like a classroom can be a microcosm for what you're talking about at a school level. When you're talking about one-off or maybe even two-off teacher trainings, that could be equated to the kind of, like I started saying at the beginning here, one-off, maybe two-off little activities that are like classroom management, bondy sorts of things that then never actually carry through when it comes to creating a community in like the smaller, did it work? Did the metaphor, is it working?
We're there.
You're both either just nodding very nicely or it worked.
You'll never know. You'll never know.
And I'm going to go with it worked. But like, I feel like this kind of does lead us into our next question is, in your experience, how is the term or the idea of classroom management or behavior management, or however you want to look at it, evolved over time through your educational experience?
Yeah. So my personal perspective on it, I think
Please.
so. I try to say this a lot on my Instagram because y'all, it's really when you know better, you do better. Because if you talk to my students in my first year of teaching, they would be like, Miss Smith did all of these things that she's telling you not to do. And I 100%, like, I'm just going to keep it real. I 100% did. And it was because of a combination of factors. Like, first, as a woman of color, I know firsthand what it takes to survive the education industrial complex, right? So from my own personal experience, I know that in the Black community, we have a saying, you have to do everything twice as good to get half as far. So as a student, I was the most on point student. I never skipped a class. Even in college, I never skipped a class. One, because I'm the only Black person in the class. So honey, they notice when I'm not in the class, right? So
They know,
we have to, as you know, to be able to, as a first generation college student, all this stuff, I really had to be super on point. So that's what I wanted for my students, because from my perspective, I experienced success. I got a full ride. I did all these things. I got the degrees, and I wanted that for my kids. And I'm like, y'all, you have to really know, you have to know these racist rules better than anybody. And you have to follow these racist rules. You have to allow yourself to be controlled. And so as a teacher, that's what a lot of my actions were informed by. Like, hey, you can't be caught slipping. You have to be perfect. You have to be twice as good as all the white students because the stakes are so much higher for you. So I was, I didn't have a clip chart, but I definitely used points. I used all kinds of systems that I would never recommend. And it was a lot about control. And I was and the crazy part is I was very successful at it. Like, I was the person that got all the behavior kids. I got an award in my little district, my local district, for, the best like classroom management. At the assemblies, honey, Miss class, like, you don't even understand. Like, my kids were pristine all of the time. And so that's honestly how I got promoted, is because everybody was like, wow, like Deonna has these kids on lock. But that wasn't like, it worked, but that was not the way to do that. Like, I definitely understood that, like, this is not doing what I wanted to do, because yeah, my kids were well behaved, but like, at what cost? Like, what did I sucked the joy out of this like 10-year-old, and now it like only knows how to sit quietly, sit and star. Like, is that really what I got into this career to do? So
I'm sorry to interrupt. Did you have, like, early on in your career, what you're talking about, was there like a voice in your head going, what am I doing? Or
yeah.
Was it? Yeah. And the reason I asked that is because I had a similar experience in that I had the moment of, what am I doing? At various points in our careers. I think that a lot of our fellow educators out there go, this is what I've been taught to do. This is what I've had modeled for me. This is how I learned. This is everything I've ever experienced. And I know it's working, but there's a nag that's going on that I can't quite pinpoint. And I don't know that not that I don't have the time to stop and examine my own practices, but it's more like I'm unwilling to take the time to cut other things out to stop and examine my own practices. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Right? Well, for me, it's like, what if I stop being like that person? Like, am I going to get fired? Am I going to get bad reviews? Like, am I going to embarrass myself? Because remember, I started teaching when I was 21 years old, right? So I'm also young. I'm like, I feel very vulnerable in this position. So I was scared to let a lot of that go, because it was working, because I was teaching like a champion. That's the book that they had us read. And that's all I got. I took a culturally responsive teaching class. It did not teach me any, my first teaching job was in East Oakland, California. I was not prepared in any way, shape, or form. So I just did what, I thought I should do. But I knew, like, that's not what I wanted for myself. That's not what I wanted for my students. That's not what I would want for, if I ever had a kid. I wouldn't want it to be like that. And it really changed too when I started going to these all white schools. So we would go on school tours and see other schools. And I went to these like really highly resourced, remember, this is the Bay Area. So I'm going like Silicon Valley, where like Apple employees' kids go. And these kids are like creating all day, and they have like maker spaces, and it's so chill and zen, and they have all this flexible seating. And I'm like, So how come my kids deserve this regimented, strict environment, and Apple over here is like singing Kumbaya and doing meditation for 45 minutes a day, and somehow they still get higher test scores? Like, it was just like, this isn't the right way to do this. So I just really had to honestly decolonize my own mind and just totally rethink and like radically reevaluate, like, what is it even classroom management? Do I want to manage my classroom, or do I want a classroom community? Like, is that what I want to be? Am I a manager? Like, that's not what I should be doing anyway. That even the term itself is terrible. So I really had to think of like, no, I want like joyful, like communities of care in my classroom where like we lovingly call each other in and hold each other accountable, and we all feel safe and like we learn together. Doesn't that sound much better than like managing, right? So I think that was kind of like my own journey that I had to go on. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I'm not saying that, you're bad or you're wrong or you're a terrible teacher for doing all of these things, because I did all of those things and I understand that it works. And I understand that it's probably easier than what I'm talking about. But what I also know is when you know better, you do better. And now that we know better, now that we know that we don't have to do it that way, we have to do better.
I would love to kind of have you touched very quickly on the clip charts, teach like a champion. Are there like one or two, maybe those two specifically, or a couple other ones that are some of these practices that have been going around for a long time, but people online are saying, wait, why shouldn't I be doing that? Or why is this, a practice that's perpetuating some of this systemic racism? What are a couple of examples of those actual classroom management practices that we can share with the audience right now?
Yeah, I think the clip chart is a big one, or just anything that's like a highly visual, like merit-based, assigning point value to like a person, I think is something that we need to start moving away from. I get it. Some schools require you to use it. And I understand that there are like some ways that you could tweak it, but we have to move away from that. Another thing that I always get flack for, and I used to be the queen of it. I used to be the queen of taking away recess, but we have to move away from taking away recess. It doesn't really make sense. If we start to think of like play as something that kids are entitled to because they're children, like, does it really make sense? Like, can you take away something that's a right that you're entitled to? I don't think so. So I think like reframing how we think about recess is important as well.
And that translates to secondary too, because like, so I teach mostly juniors and seniors. So it's not recess, but there are moments where I'm like, you guys need to go on a walk. I like from like in the most simplistic form, like I need a minute too. And I'm a person. So like you need to go on your walk, which is your recess right now. I will see you in 3 minutes. Like it's different at the different, age appropriateness. But like what you're saying, why would you take that away from children? Obviously their behavior, if their behavior is that bad, then that probably dictates that they need a break. And then also, why would you do that to yourself? Like as a teacher, like, no, it's okay. I need a minute. Yeah.
That part. Like I got so tired of being in during their recess. I'm like, now why am I in here? Because like I want some fun. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? And it really, I understand like it's really what you do with it. So like there are times when during recess, something needs to happen. And that kid might not have that recess for that day. But I'm talking about habitual, day in and day out, recess. That's something that just like, I had to let go of that because it was more about my ego, right? It was more about like, you messed up my time, I'm taking your time. And I'm like, why am I beefing with a 10-year-old? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, first of all, you're a child, and I have to like step back from that. And it's not about this isn't my time. This is a classroom community. Like, what am I talking about? So that's another one that I think we really, really have to move away from. And I just got, people were upset with me about this last week about kicking the kids out of class. And I just really feel, as somebody who has been on the other side of the receiving end, being in the office, kicking these kids out of class day in and day in and day, it's not doing what you think it's doing. Now, there are exceptions. Like a kid is a danger to themselves and others. Yes, take a walk, take a lap. The kid needs a break, you need a break, take a lap. But I'm talking about the kid that I see in the office multiple times a week. Like, if you're a danger to yourself and others multiple times a week, then that's telling me that there's something going on about the climate. So we're so obsessed with these, with what we see that's visible, which is the behavior. let's get to the root of the behavior. Let's talk about what is the antecedent to that behavior. So for me, those types of solutions are, I'm not going to say never have a place, but those are things that we need to move away from.
Well, because to your point, like that child is having needs that are not being met, whether it's at school or at home or in general. That child is having their needs go unmet, and it's actually like further damaging the more that it's like, go to the office. Yeah.
Behavior it's just feedback.
Exactly.
Know what's going on. Like think of a baby. A baby cries. They don't have any way of communicating with you what's going on. That's how they're letting you know. Sir who's cutting up over here, that's how he's letting you know. That's your feedback. So, you got to take yourself out of it. I think so much of it as teachers, we take it personally, and it's hard because we're overworked. And that's why I work with administrators too, because don't think that I'm just telling teachers what they should and should not be doing. No, I'm also saying and acknowledging that the school climate is going to either facilitate this for you or make it really, really hard for you to do what I'm talking about. So that's why I love working with admins too, because I do get it. Teachers also need a break, but we all have to just like rehumanize every person in that experience.
It's a very humbling experience too, to sit back and examine your clip chart strategy, I used to have to flip a card. I will never forget poor Chase in my first grade class who flipped a card every day, at least once or twice. I mean, but that stays in a kid's mind, and that can be very damaging. And like what you're talking about of examining your own practices is so scary. I guess it's got to be very scary, because you look back and you go, have I been hurting kids, or whatever it is that goes through an educator's head. And it's so necessary, that humbling experience of examining your own practices to know better, do better. Yes.
We're gonna kind of keep going on this path, because we're in this series really kind of thinking about just classroom community, and especially establishing a lot of that at the beginning of the year. And so I know teachers are wondering the difference between rules and expectations. And I have one rule: it's respect. And like, everyone needs to go on their own journey, figure out their own things. But I'm wondering about anything in particular that teachers should like think about before they even make a misstep. Like I'm thinking about things like slant, and other things of that nature, of like the way that I come out and I say, this is how my classroom runs. Are there practices like that? And I guess these are kind of overlapping with the teach like a champion type of mindset, things that we should already kind of have red flags up about before we start the school year.
Yeah. Anything that's focused on control and not community, that's a red flag for me. You have to think about, am I trying to control or am I trying to build a community? And it's hard, because we do, y'all already know, this is how I feel about the United States in general. We are so focused on like control. We don't think about like, are we in community with people? So that's how I think you should start. Like, I'm trying to build a community of learners. What would I like? Okay. Like, think about yourself. For me personally, as a neurodivergent, slant is just not going to happen for me. So why I was on my kids about that for years, I'll never know. But that's just not, that doesn't make it a lot of sense, right?
Well, you guys tell me what slant is. I can't remember.
Sitting up, listening, asking and answering questions, nothing in your hands, tracking the speaker.
Oh.
Like about like how you're supposed to sit in your desk and watch it, be part of class. Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully I'm not the only one who forgot that. Okay.
Yeah. And then the other thing I like to think about as like a framework is, are you focused on punishment or are you thinking about consequences? Because a consequence makes a lot of sense, right? Hey, chief, you did this, this is what's going to happen. That's not a great way to do that. So we have to do X, Y, and Z. A punishment is, I am upset that you did that, and I want you to feel a certain type of way about what you did. We don't need to punish our kids, right? Again, a lot of it is about the teacher ego and how we're feeling. And that's why whenever I do a course or anything, I start with the teacher and the internal work. And, to take it even a step further, there is no checklist. Let me just clarify that. There is no checklist. There is no system. There is nothing that you can do. We have to let go of our obsession of like methods and checklists, because that's not what it is. If you are a person who has an anti-racist mindset, it oozes out of you in everything that you do. You will not be able to just check it off. It should be almost hard to put into words what you're doing, right? So that's why it has to start with your mindset. So before you go make a rule or set up a classroom or anything like that, take some time with yourself. What are you still holding on to? What are your triggers? What were you taught respect looks like? How do you react when you feel like a kid doesn't respect you? What makes you, what takes you from 1 to 10? What are those types of students? You have to be so aware of that, because when you're kicking kids out and you're taking kids recess, a lot of times it's the teachers that are struggling with a particular behavior with a particular student that's triggering them in some way, right? It's usually not just a kid that they have a really good relationship with that just made one honest mistake. It's usually kind of, you've gotten to a toxic cycle with a couple of your students. So that internal work, that's where you got to start before you even set foot in the school building, from my perspective.
I agree 100%, because it's irresponsible to go into a setting where you're in charge of other people's babies and not have we all have our days. We all have our seasons of life, but it's what you're talking about is examining yourself and looking at this is, formative experiences for other human beings. And I have a lot of sway over that as the teacher standing up in front of a classroom. Therefore, it is my human responsibility to examine my own triggers, my own biases, my own practices that maybe I can do better. Yes.
Well, we talked about this a few episodes ago, and I think, Deonna, at the high school level, one of the things beyond, so once you've done that work, I think we then also have this struggle where a lot of teachers are lone wolfing it. They're taking on, right, all of these. If you're having a particular struggle with a student, we feel like we're completely isolated, when really you share this student with 6 or 7 other teachers, their counselor, the dean, and we don't always have our schools set up so that we can work together with a student and with solving problems. And I think that that's one thing that we really wanted to talk about in that collaboration series was this is another consequence of shutting your door and doing your thing is, one, you might not even be in touch with your own biases and issues. And 2, when there are problems, you shouldn't be solving them all by yourself when there's a whole school community there. And I mean, that's another huge part of the problem is trying to do it by themselves. And high school behavior issues are sometimes very, very scary and difficult. Again, we shouldn't be solving those alone.
Yeah. And people don't realize how much your culture plays into how you handle behavior. A lot of folks think that they don't, especially white folks, think that they don't have a culture, but that's just not true. You have a very defined culture. And part of popular American culture is that individualism. And that's why people close their doors, because they're not thinking about a community. That's why you feel like I have to solve this by myself. And that also a big part of American culture is personal responsibility. That's why we hyper focus on punishments, right? And less on communities. So I think understanding that your culture, your background, your experiences informs how you move in the classroom is going to help you position yourself to be able to not only manage behavior, right? But to actualize a community of learners, because that's what we're trying to get to. So it's so critical to take those steps back. And a study that I just read was talking about how the most common infraction, right, that teachers cite kids for is disrespect. And that's so problematic because what is respect?
What does that even mean?
Right, exactly. If you grew up in certain cultures, it's respectful to look someone in the eye. Others, it's not. You for example, in my family and a lot of Black American culture, it's not impolite to interrupt somebody. It's we collaboratively make sentences together as opposed to taking turns listening. So it's a perfect example of where a kid could be in a classroom, think that they're just vibing, having a conversation and another thing, right? And they get in trouble for disrespecting because they're talking over the teacher. So it's little things like that I need folks to understand. Your individual actions on a really, really micro level represent culture, represent these very complex webs that we have with each other as human beings on a macro level. So understanding where you are situated in all of that is going to help you and inform your practice much more than something that is just focused on monitoring behavior, even a class dojo, right? Or some sort of point system, which is easier, granted, but that doesn't lead you to that community that you want to be creating.
Well, and I think the thing that I keep replaying in my head too is, Amanda, I think you said once you've done that work, and I have to push back a little bit on you, my friend, once you've done the work of reflection, I think that it's ongoing. I think that it has to be continual, and it has to be, even if you just think about like in a completely different like realm, a mental health journey, right? Because I've been on my own mental health journey. Our listeners know, but I have wicked anxiety and I've had bouts with depression, and it's not like, and now I'm better. Like it's ongoing. And in the same way as learning what respect means in different cultures and understanding that respect, even from a different culture, is going to differ from family to family and from group to group. And that is such a nebulous and yet simple idea that then within our classrooms, a diverse population means that it's taking in everybody's ideas and just being responsive to it. Like, I'm never going to know everything, but I need to understand that I'm never going to know everything. And so I, the teacher and myself, always need to keep trying to learn. And that's not easy.
Yeah.
It's a practice. Yeah.
And that's a misconception that a lot of teachers have. Like, I don't know if you saw on Edutopia, they did this survey in 2021, and something like 62% of teachers said that they were anti-racist. I was like, what?
Sure about that? Yeah.
Respectfully, I disagree, because there's no way, like, what are we talking about? We would not be seeing the outcomes that we're seeing if that was even close to true. So like, there are so many, like, I can recommend plenty of books, but after you read one, that doesn't make you anti-racist. Even I am in the pursuit of anti-racism, but I would never come into any space and be like, I'm done. You know what I mean? I know what I need to know, right? Like, right, exactly. It's a continuous journey. And I encourage people to fall in love with the journey. The journey doesn't have to just be arduous. And that's sometimes white folks get afraid of this work because they think it's going to make them feel like negative or just feel bad about being white. And that's like such a small part of it. It's not just about like unlearning all of the bad things. It's about learning how to cultivate joy. It's about learning how to celebrate other cultures, not accept, not tolerate, but celebrate other people. It's about, about learning, to love to learn, and like learning what it means to radically love your students in a way that sees them as human beings and rejects the dehumanizing structures that we have all through education. So like, it could be fun, but I encourage you all to fall in love with the journey and the process of doing that, because it is a lifelong journey.
I can't agree with you more. And I think you're right, Marie. And I definitely didn't mean that we would be done, but I think my personality maybe was kind of driving that, is that I like to start things on my own, but then bring in, right? Yeah. Like, I think I think we just need to figure out, like, we need to get on the journey.
Amanda, I knew what you meant, but I wanted to make sure that we made it abundantly, because I speak Amanda, right? Like, I speak Amanda, but I wanted to make it clear that you meant the beginning. That you have, like, right? You're seeking out information, and you are seeking out understanding, and you're seeking out other people and their information and their understanding to create an ongoing process of learning. Yes.
Yeah. I'm super not defensive about it, but I am like overly, and I was very passionate about it in our collaboration episode. Like, I spent a long time lone wolfing it and regret it. I mean, it caused a lot of problems, and unlearning, like Deonna said, like, that was cultural for me, was that I am the problem solver. I take it all on my shoulders. And I've heard that from so many teachers that feel like they're in it alone. They're all by themselves. And like, this journey should be a shared one, especially at a school. And like you said, that's why you go in and work with principals and whole buildings, and trying to do this by yourself can be very, very difficult and so on. But like, with that said, I'm turning a tiny little bit, because I think it's really important to talk to, especially, Deonna, we have a lot of middle school and high school teachers listening, and they have reported back, Marie has reported back, that that there are a lot of struggles in two realms. Like, one of these is students experiencing microaggressions between one another, and then also microaggressions occurring between teachers and students. And you speak about this a lot and very eloquently. And I think it would be really great to hear from you about just what that looks like, and maybe how to intervene or how to reflect if that's the teacher, and what some of those next steps might be when that's happening in the classroom.
Yeah. I think that my number one advice for it, even if it seems like totally out of the ballpark, if a student is communicating to you that you have been racist or you have microaggressed them in some way, the first thing you have to do is to listen. And I don't care if you are a person of color and maybe you're just white passing, or if your great grandmother came over here from Sicily, or if you have a master's degree in urban education, or your favorite movie is Black Panther, it does not matter. You have to listen. I see so many teachers that are just like, and he said that I was being racist and I was shocked. And my first question is, well, were you? Like, I don't know, right? You have to accept that it's possible. It is absolutely possible. Me as a Black woman, I can say something that's microaggressive towards my students. Anybody could do it. And so I encourage you to, like, when you hear something like that, notice how your body reacts, like notice, acknowledge it, and then like process it on your own. It doesn't become the kid's job to process that with you. And I think so much of this just goes back to mindfulness. Like, I'm a huge believer in mindfulness, because just like notice how that lands with you, because so many times we get defensive, we go from 0 to 100, and it's really hard, and we get escalated. And then we're trying to de-escalate a student, and we're escalated. Right. An escalated adult cannot de-escalate an escalated child under any circumstances. So it's important to sit with that and do your own work and reflection. And I think that like we have to stop being so afraid that we're part of the problem, because to be honest with you, we all are. We're all swimming in the toxic water. We're all like, the water is toxic. The air we breathe is toxic. We are all breathing in more than 400 years of systemic racism, oppression, like anti everything, right? So you have to understand that, like, in a lot of ways, we are part of the problem. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that we have to just be okay with that, but we have to be okay when that's called out. So I think that's critical. I think, especially with older high school students and teachers, I see a lot of like putting the emotional and like the labor on kids. And I would really caution folks to like think more critically about that, because it's not a student of color's job to absolve you of your white guilt. And so you have to work through that on your own. That's time for you to take. It's not really on the kids. And now with social media and just the way that kids are and the way that a lot of teachers are, they are teaching us so much, and they are ahead of us on the curve on so many things. So that's a good thing, and it's a bad thing, because once again, what I hear from Black and brown students in high school is, yeah, we had to teach our white teacher that Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. And I'm like, oh, God. I need you to be better, right? So I think a lot of it has to do with taking a step back and doing your own work. When it comes to microaggressions between students, you have to remember, students, Black, brown, white, everything, they're acting out and they're echoing and they're negotiating this awakened hyper understanding and awareness of race. When you come into adolescence, you're never more aware of your subject position, right? And things that are salient and not salient. And they're negotiating that. And they've got TikTok. And they've got all these other things that are influencing that, right? So they're almost playing it out. So you have to understand that some of that is like figuring out where the limits and boundaries are, but you have to make sure that that can be done in a way that doesn't cause harm. The number one thing that I see is schools not understanding the psychological harm that it causes kids of color to just live in predominantly white spaces on a day-to-day basis. There's actually a really fascinating study. I'm forgetting his name, but it talks about how your brain, like the connective tissue in your brain, is actually impacted. I think they're called telomeres, is actually impacted by being in PWIs. Like Black kids' brains are actually rewired, and our mental capacity shrinks being in these PWIs because of the microaggressions that we experience on a daily basis. Y'all have to look this up. It's fascinating. Yes. So there is something really happening, right? So we have to name that. Schools and teachers have to name that. You need to name that, like, it does matter when you are, and even if your school isn't a PWI, the world is run like a PWI. So we're all experiencing this trauma. So you have to be okay with like naming that and holding space for your students. I'm a big believer in like creating affinity groups. I'm a big believer in bringing in the community, bringing outside people in. If you're feeling like you're out of your depth with this and you still have your learning, that's okay. Tap on your resources, find resources that can come and support you in that work. So, but I think it's really important when these microaggressions, like in the moment, right when it happens, even if you don't know what to say, acknowledge it. Like, hey, I heard you make this comment. It's not okay. I don't know what to say about that right now. Cause that's how it usually happens, right? Like you hear it, you're like, like, you don't even know how to. So usually what I'll do is be like, I heard that. I see that. We're going to come back to that. And then making sure that whoever's on the receiving end, like you see them. Don't ignore it. I've seen so many teachers like, we'll be in the main corridor. They'll hear the N-word. I see them hear it. They know I saw them hear it, but they don't know what to say. So they just walk on by. And I'm like, even if you don't know what to say, because I know that can be uncomfortable as a white person. They're like, how do I handle this? Like, please help. Even if you don't want to say, just say like, hey, I want to acknowledge that I heard that. And then holding space for the other folks who are impacted or whatever to be like, I see you, right? I like, you know, a humanizing moment. Like I hear, and it doesn't matter how that landed with you. It's not okay with me. Because that's another thing that'll happen. You might hear microaggression and maybe the Black or brown kids are like, no, it's okay. They have a N-word card, or no, it's all good.
Right. They've got a pass. We're all joking. Yes.
Then say, okay, well, it's not okay with me. Right? Don't let them do that. Be like, then it's not okay with me. I'm not okay with that, because that's not the kind of community that we're cultivating here. That's not the kind of space that this is. So make sure you name it, make sure that you know how to address it. And it's really, really important to understand that like individual things are happening, but you have to put it in the broader societal context. So even if in that individual case, like a kid was like, it's okay, right? You still want to connect it to the broader context. And my favorite way to handle microaggressions is just with learning. I had some kids that were like singing this song super loud. One of the lyrics was like, what's my favorite word? BITCH. And this was when I was in the Bay. And so I was like, okay, let's unpack that. Right? Like, what does it mean to be that? Like, how has that word been used? Let's talk about misogyny. Let's talk about misogynoir. Like, I just really leaned into that of like, if you understood the complex nature of what you were saying, because I know you and I see you and I love you and I want better for you, I know you wouldn't be saying it. So just leaning into that and remembering the number one thing is you're always planting seeds. That child might come back the next day and say the same thing. And you need to know you planted a seed, it's going to germinate, but we're not looking for a turnaround overnight. So don't put that pressure on yourself as well.
Well, because again, we're not looking for immediate compliance, right? You're looking for community building. You're looking for, I see you, you're a person and you're learning and I'm learning and it's community.
Oh my gosh. I needed to hear that as a mom of a 4 and 3-year-old.
Well, yeah. Child behavior is just really distilled down to like its absolute essence. But like adults do the same thing. We do the same things. We have to learn it over and over and over again before we really get it, depending on what the lesson is. It's just people being people.
Yes.
That's all it is. We're just about out of time, which is really sad because I feel like we could talk to you forever. So we'll have to have you back, of course, right? When everything gets better, right? This year.
And it's all done.
This school year is going to just be like a reset, like we're going to be fine. So we'll talk about how it all worked and it's all was fixed. No. But speaking of like starting fresh, whether people are coming in at the start of the year or getting hired kind of frantically, a lot of new teachers come here to this podcast specifically to get support, whether it's curriculum or things like we're talking about today. In a few words, I mean, what is that advice other than what you've already shared, which is brilliant advice? Any advice for new teachers specifically as they're navigating this world of like what schools expecting, whether or not that aligns with anti-racist, anti-bias teaching and what they're going to be evaluated on, like, right? Like how they kind of decide who they're going to be as teachers. What do you say to new teachers, Deonna?
Yeah. I would say one thing to remember that like all of this ABAR and just the whole field, right, is really good teaching. Like when we boil it down, these are best practices that work for all students and they are backed up with a lot of data. So don't feel like, I know some teachers like, oh, I don't want to be the person that's always bringing up this, or like, I feel like that's kind of like an add-on. It's not an add-on. These are just good teaching practices and they will work for your students regardless of wherever they come from, because they're practices that see students as full, complex, beautiful humans, right? And not as like cogs in a big machine. We're like breaking down the way that they want us to teach, right? Which is very much like, I'm the teacher, I have the knowledge, I tell you your little banks to be filled. And we're like centering human beings and creating communities. So if you're worried about like the label, I don't know, people are like listening in Florida and they're worried about like what the label is and all of that. Just remember that it's just good teaching, right? I would say like as soon as you get in there, you need to find your squad, find your allies. It can be so isolating. I've talked to lots of people who they're like, I'm that person in meetings and like I'm the only one that ever brings it up and it's so frustrating. I don't want that for you. So I want you to find, even if they're people outside of your school, in your district, who are those people that are like, yeah, they're your teacher friends, but like they're also your friends that you could be like, let's read this book together. Like, let's do this article together. Let's do this course together. So find those people that help feed you and help you feel like renewed and like you're not crazy, because you will feel crazy on a lot. Like there's every day, right? Every day we're teaching like, I'm losing my mind. Right?
It's only me. It's only me.
Right,
it's only me. Yeah.
You need those people that are like, no, girl, like we got you. It's not just you. And then I would say like really thinking about reflecting on your experience, on who you want to be, who you are, how you would like to learn. Like you need to be so well grounded in that, because you're going to be hit with all of these outside things that's going to, you know, really like in a lot of ways strip a lot of the joy out of teaching. Like it just kind of becomes so mechanical and very like procedural. So I think connecting and like staying close to your why, like why did you want to do this? What kind of teacher do you want to be? How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to make your kids feel? How did you like to feel? Like what made you feel excited as a learner? All of that, like staying connected to that in the chaos of standardized test after standardized test is going to help you feel more grounded. So I would really sit with yourself a little bit and kind of like be your authentic teacher self, so that that can carry into your classroom. That's some kind of like 30,000 feet advice.
But I mean, we talk all the time about our experiences as new teachers and the advice that we would also give to new educators, no matter what stage of life you're in. If you're just a new educator or you're renewing things, that foundation and coming back to why am I here? What is it that I want to do with this career or job? It's whatever way you look at it, it's a calling unlike any other out there. It is a calling of service. It is a calling of so many pieces of identity are wrapped up in our jobs when we're educators. And so, yeah, it's 30,000 feet, but it's also very, again, humanizing of like, it's okay to care so much. It's, I'd like my own kids, my babies, to be in classrooms with people who care that deeply and who care deeply enough to like humble themselves.
Yes.
Oh no, humble themselves to do like reflective work. Yeah. That's what we want. Oh, I'm going to cry thinking about my kids going to school. Okay.
But Maria,
intense.
I feel that way too. And I think this is what you're going to feel as a new teacher, and even teachers who have been there for a while. It's too much. It's so overwhelming. There's so much stuff. So finding a place for your quiet to come back to your center, what matters to you, and remembering that you have a choice of where to put your energy, and that we can be scrambling and racing to fulfill all of the ancillary ridiculousness, or we can come back to center, remember why we're here, remember that we have other people's babies, and that the work that matters to us takes space, takes time, and that sometimes the other to-do list things are going to have to just stay on the to-do list a little bit longer. And it's okay to find your space and find your groove. And, you know, we're here for so many reasons, and your balance, your mental health, your vision, like all of that kind of intangible is just as important as the lesson plan you're putting in front of students. And we need to make space for that. Yes.
And then my really practical tip is no content for the first like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Build the community. Like, don't you dare. Don't. It's so tempting with that pacing guide. I know, but don't do it. You have to, you'll thank yourself. And I've never met a teacher that was like, I spent too much time relationship building. I've met many teachers that were like, man, I should not have jumped into it in the first week, because by October,
it all falls apart. Well, and from like a really pragmatic standpoint, if all of that is in place and you've been building and cultivating and continuing to foster a tight-knit community within your classroom, guess what's really easy to do? Teach content.
That's what I'm like.
Yep.
If you community up, if you have a community of learners, they will learn. Hear me out. Like,
right.
I know it's frustrating for a lot of people. The kids aren't learning, but baby, they will. Like, they'll start learning things. It'll be great.
Yeah. Like, promise. It's like tried and true. It super works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Deonna, will you tell people where they can find you, where they can get you to come and work with their school, where they can just follow along? I love watching your Instagram stories and just like getting these doses of inspiration and understanding from you specifically. Where can they find you?
Of course. So my Instagram is just my name, Deonna, Deonna Smith. And that's where I post reels, Instagram stories, lots of content there. For working with schools, you can find me at deonnasmithconsulting.com, very direct. And that is just, it gives you a little bit about like what I do, more in depth, my former partners that I've worked with in the past. So all of that good stuff. And then I do have, you can learn more about like my specific courses. So I do have a course on anti-racist behavior management specifically. That's great for K-12. And that is, you can get info on my website or my Instagram. And I also have another course called the Anti-Racist Institute, which is like really meant for teachers who are like, give me all of it, like behavior, instruction, bringing in families. And it's designed to be like a 6-week, but you could binge it and like do it all at once, or you can chop it up. It's up to you. But that's just like really meant to like give you, it's like a mini course. Like I designed it basically how I design when I do college courses. Like that's what it is. It's a small version of that. So that is called ARI, the Anti-Racist Institute. And both of those you can find more information about on my Instagram or on my website, DeonnaSmithConsulting.com. And then you can also, like, if you have a question or you want to know more about something in particular, you can send me a DM or an email. And if you go to my Instagram, you can see all the information for how to like get me on email too.
And we will have links to all of this in our show notes. So make sure, if you're driving to work right now and you did not get all of that down, don't worry. Go to the show notes for this episode and we will have all of Deonna's links right there so you can get your daily dose as well of the amazingness that is Dr. Smith.
Oh, official. So official. When was that official? May,
yes.
All right.
School after, like how many years, like 18 years of school, I'm finally done.
That's what you say now, but then there's something addicting about degrees. You just keep getting them, don't you? Right?
Accumulating them. Yeah.
Yeah. I stopped for a little while here, but like, I feel like you just, I don't know. And it's also because we're like education nerds that we're like, and another one. And hey, what about that certificate? Sure. I'm halfway there. Yeah, that one too. I could totally teach PE now. Yeah.
Good segue, Marie.
Thank you. I do what I can. Deonna, thank you so, so, so much for spending your time with us today and chatting and just like sharing your genius and your expertise and like such a great insight. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I'm so excited y'all reached out. I love doing podcasts. So thank you so much.
Oh, good. Well, we'll certainly have you back.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'd love to. All right. Thank you. Thank you. And listeners, we will see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.